The Columbus Blue Jackets sold basically every pick they had in the 2019 draft to buy at the deadline. Was it worth it? And did they get any gems in that draft anyway? We're going to talk about all of that on today's Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more because right now new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So like I said at the top of the show, today we're going to be talking about the 2019 NHL draft for the Blue Jackets because it's been about 5 years-ish since it happened. And they always say that you need 5 years to really look at how good a draft class was. And I didn't realize, or had forgotten until I started doing my prep for this, was that this was the draft where they sold basically everything to pick up pieces for the playoff run, which they weren't in a playoff spot at the deadline, I don't think. They bet hard and, they went big instead of going home, and luckily they made the playoffs. But the Blue Jackets had 2 4th-round picks and a 7th-round pick in this draft. So we're going to look at those players. Specifically, a couple of them aren't really anything. One of them, Dmitry Voronkov, is probably the best of, well, not probably, definitely the best of the bunch. And for a 4th-round pick, he's looking pretty good. But we're going to talk about those guys in a little bit here, because I wanted to just go through the draft first and look at the players that were taken with the Blue Jackets draft picks to see if they missed out on anything. Then we're going to talk about the players that the Blue Jackets actually ended up taking. And then I want to look at the Blue Jackets and was buying at the deadline that year worth it. So let's go ahead and look at the draft. So no 1st-round pick. That went to the Ottawa Senators because that was the Columbus Blue Jackets' 1st-round pick went to the Ottawa Senators as the result of a trade that sent Matt Duchene and Julius Bergman to Columbus in exchange for Vitaly Abramov, Jonathan Davidson, a conditional 1st-round pick in 2020, and the 1st-round pick in 2019, which was also conditional. So the 2019 condition was that if the Blue Jackets pick outside of the top 3 selections in 2019, which they did, Ottawa receives the 1st-round pick. So that's that one. The 2020 pick was also conditional. That was they would get the 1st-round pick if the Blue Jackets ended up re-signing Matt Duchene, which they did not. So Ottawa got Vitaly Abramov, who's no longer in the league, Jonathan Davidson, who's no longer in the league, and this 2019 1st-round pick, which they used to select defenseman Lassie Thompson, who the Monsters just played against, actually. He played for the Belleville Senators this season, and has, I believe, just gone back to Finland. He will not be in the AHL or the NHL next season. So based on that pick, I feel pretty good about that. Just kind of looking, again, like I talked a little bit about the players that came after Igor Chinikov in yesterday's episode. Just looking at some of the players that came after the Blue Jackets pick at 19 overall, or what would have been the Blue Jackets pick. There's no one here where I'm like, wow, I wish the Blue Jackets had picked that guy up. Like maybe Jacob Pelletier for the Calgary Flames went 26th. Shane Pinto went 32nd to the Senators. Arthur Kaliev went 33rd to the Kings. Bobby Brink went 34th to the Flyers. But like none of these guys, I'm like, oh man, I really wish the Blue Jackets had picked that guy instead of making the playoffs that year. Because like that's what it's about, isn't it? It's if they didn't have Duchene, would they have made the playoffs? And the answer is, I mean, maybe. Obviously, that was the year that I believe that was the Bobrovsky-Vezina year. That was Artemi Panarin's final year in Columbus. But I feel pretty good about giving up that 1st-round pick, especially because they didn't have to give up their 2nd 1st-round pick. 2 1st-round picks for Matt Duchene, although I guess it would have been different if he did end up re-signing with the Blue Jackets. So who could say? But I feel pretty good about that trade. Moving on to the 2nd round, the Blue Jackets' 2nd-round pick went to the Kings because they traded. Okay, the Columbus Blue Jackets' second-round pick went to the Kings as a result of a trade that sent a third and a fifth-round pick to Montreal. Montreal acquired the pick as a part of a trade that sent Max Pacioretty to Vegas in exchange for Thomas Tatar, Nick Suzuki, and that second-round pick. And then Vegas got the second-round pick from the Blue Jackets because they made sure that Vegas was going to pick William Karlsson in the 2017 draft. And so in exchange for them doing that, Columbus also sent them David Clarkson, a first-round pick in 2017, and this second-round pick. And the Kings ended up picking Samuel Fagemo, who has been an extremely good player for the Ontario Reign. He scored 43 goals in 50 games this season for them. But again, I'm not heartbroken that the Blue Jackets didn't end up getting this guy. I do think that he is probably an NHL player at this point, but I'm not sitting here man, how did we miss out on this guy, etc., etc., etc. So that's the second round pick. The third round pick went to the Florida Panthers in exchange for they sent Minnesota and Pittsburgh's fourth round picks, so 104th overall and 114th overall, which is the fourth round picks that they ended up keeping, to Columbus in exchange for this pick. So they traded their third round pick to get two fourth round picks, just I guess to throw another dart in, because otherwise they would have had a third round pick and no fourth round picks instead of no third round pick and two fourth round picks. I don't know why. they picked up an extra pick 20 places down. So Florida ended up picking Cole Schwindt at 81st, which is a name that I know, but I couldn't tell you anything about him. I think he's playing in the NHL for them. Fourth round pick, they actually traded their own first round pick to the Rangers in exchange for Adam McQuaid, which was, I believe, it wasn't necessarily a three-way trade, but Julius Bergman, who the Blue Jackets got in the Matt Duchene trade, went to New York with a seventh round pick, this fourth round pick in exchange for Adam McQuaid, who ended up being a pretty good depth defenseman for the Blue Jackets. And then, obviously, we've talked about their two fourth round picks that they got in the trade. Their fifth round pick went to the Sabres via Detroit because of a trade that sent Toronto's sixth round pick and a seventh round pick to Detroit in exchange for this pick. Detroit previously acquired this pick because they sent Montreal's sixth round pick to Columbus in 2018 in exchange for this pick. So they just basically swapped picks. This pick was used on a guy called Philip Cederquist, who, again, I have heard of. I think he's, again, mostly an AHLer. And we're getting into it now. The fifth, sixth, seventh round, it's so rare. I'm looking at the list of players that went in the sixth round, and I've heard of a handful of these guys, but none of them have really made an impact. The sixth round pick went to the Coyotes from Columbus in exchange for Ryan McInnes went to Columbus in exchange for Jacob Graves and this pick. I genuinely don't remember anything about Ryan McInnes. I assume he was a Monsters guy. Again, Jacob Graves, also a Monsters guy. I don't think either of those guys touched the Blue Jackets. And then the Coyotes ended up drafting Daniil Savunov, who doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that he did not do much of anything. Seventh round, we're almost done. The Blue Jackets pick went to New York again. So this was the other pick that went to New York in exchange for Adam McQuaid. But interestingly, the seventh round pick that the Blue Jackets did have in this draft came from the Calgary Flames, or it came from the Ottawa Senators, excuse me. But it was originally the Flames seventh round pick. The Senators got it as the result of a trade in 2018. They traded this pick for that sent Nick Shaw to Calgary, and then the Senators sent a seventh round pick to Columbus in exchange for Anthony Duclair and a second round pick in 2020 and a second round pick in 2021. The Blue Jackets got Ryan Dzingel and this seventh round pick that they used to draft Tyler Angle, we'll talk about him in a little bit here. And then Eric Ciccolini is the guy that the Rangers drafted with that 7th round pick. So, like, there's no one on this list that I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, they should have kept that pick. Obviously, a lot of the players that they picked, I think every player that they picked up in that kind of buying at the deadline. So, there's really only 3 main guys there was Adam McQuaid, Matt Duchene, and Ryan Dzingel. None of those guys stayed. But the Blue Jackets made the playoffs on the back of these players. This depth ended up winning their first playoff series. And we're going to talk in a little bit about whether that was worth it or not. That's coming up at the end of the show. We'll do that in like the 3rd segment. In just a second, I want to take a look at the 3 players that the Blue Jackets did end up drafting. So 2 4th-round picks and a 7th-round pick. Dmitry Voronkov, Eric Hjorth, I believe his name is, and Tyler Angle. So those are the guys that they picked up in the 2019 draft, and we're going to talk about those guys in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about FanDuel. It's winner-take-all time in the NBA and the NHL. FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Just go in, find the heaviest favorite that you can, and if it wins, you're going to get $150 that you can bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every playoff shot count. America's number one sportsbook is FanDuel. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/locked-on, and they are the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Talk about the 2019 draft, and we've just gone through the extremely long list of the picks that the Blue Jackets traded away in that draft, mostly to pick up players for their playoff run. There was a couple that were just pick swaps, and then one of them was involved in the trade that made sure that the Vegas Golden Knights would pick William Karlsson at the expansion draft instead of I think it was basically don't pick Josh Anderson. And you can have a 1st-round pick, a 2nd-round pick, and also David Clarkson's contract to help you hit the floor. So that was, in hindsight, not a great trade. At the time, probably wasn't a great trade, but it is what it is. It happened. I don't think keeping that 2nd-round pick specifically would have been the difference maker there. Potentially that 2017 1st-round pick and keeping William Karlsson instead of Josh Anderson might have been the difference maker. But hey, like I said, hindsight is 2020. But I want to talk about the players that the Blue Jackets did end up drafting. We'll talk about them in order. The first one is a guy called Eric Hjorth, who is a Swedish defenseman, and he is a guy that hasn't really made much of an impact. He hasn't made any impact in North America, really. He played a season with the Sarnia Sting. That would have been his D+1 year. Before that, he played his juniors all the way through to J20 in Sweden. Had 29 points in 60 games with the Sarnia Sting of the OHL in the 2019-2020 season, and then immediately went back to Sweden, moved to Finland. This most recent season actually played with the Trois-Rivières Lions of the ECHL, recorded 9 points in 43 games, and that's about as close as he's gone to the NHL. Not a sparkling pick, if I'm being honest, but again, I'm looking at the guys that were drafted kind of around him, and there's a couple of guys that were drafted ahead of him. So Matej Blumel has turned into a really great player for the Dallas Stars. Henry Thrun is going to be pretty good for the Sharks. Matthias Michelli, these were all drafted before Hjorth, so they're not really in the conversation here. But I'm looking at the guys that were drafted after him, and there's not really anyone that I'm okay, well, they've really missed out on this player here. The 4th round is kind of honestly, anything from the 3rd round on, I feel is kind of a crapshoot unless your scouting department is fully on it. And admittedly, the Blue Jackets scouting department is pretty good, which is why you sometimes get gems that happen in the 4th round. Gems like Dmitry Voronkov, who I am extremely pleasantly surprised with. And so, I'm not going to go into a huge Dmitry Voronkov tangent because I just very recently did the did the season review on him and talked about how surprised I was based on like what I'd seen from him in the 4 games he played with the Monsters, the start of the season with the Blue Jackets. And to be fair to him, he figured it out. He made it work, had a really good rookie season for the Blue Jackets. Still definitely has work to do, but for a guy that, a 4th round pick that you maybe take a flyer on, I think they got extremely lucky. It helped that he grew like 5 inches and put 50 pounds on after being drafted. So between like turning 18 and turning 22, he grew like 5 inches and put like 40 to 50 pounds on. Because when he came to camp, he was listed as 6'1" and like 205, I think. And then they measured him because he hadn't been measured by the NHL since the draft combine. And it turned out actually he was 6'5" and like 250 pounds. So like he grew a little bit, which is always fun. This season had 34 points in 75 games, 18 goals, 16 assists. Played 4 games for the Monsters, only had 1 assist in those 4 games, but really kind of carved out a niche in this team that I think is it's gonna be really interesting and really fun, kind of as it goes. Also of note, Dmitry Voronkov was on the 2022 Winter Olympics team, which I believe was the last Olympics that the Russians were allowed to play in. And he got a silver medal for that. He also has a silver medal for the World Juniors in 2020, the Under-20 World Juniors. He got a silver medal there, and he was also named a top 3 player on Team Russia. And he was KHL Rookie of the Month in February of 2020. So those are all of his accolades right now. But I feel like if that's the pick that you get out of this draft, where you had 3 draft picks and none of them above the 4th round, I feel pretty good about Dmitry Voronkov as that selection. Again, looking at the guys that went after him, there's not really anyone here that like has really like, oh man, definitely should have picked up that guy. Like I'm looking even into the 5th round. There's not really like no one here was in the NHL, looking at the draft and looking at the guys that were drafted after him that played in the NHL this season. There was Max Crozier of the Lightning. He played 13 games. Nick Abruzzi played 11 games for the Leafs. Mark Kastelik has played 144 games for the Ottawa Senators. So, okay, there's a guy that's made his NHL debut, but he has 25 points in those 144 games. Goalie doesn't count. Aku Ratu for the Coyotes has 1 NHL game. So he played the 4th most. Juuso Parssinen has played 89 career NHL games. He was a 7th round pick for the Predators. He has 37 points in those 89 games. And then Raphael Harvey-Pinard has played 83 games for the Canadiens, and that's 31 points. So like after the 4th round, no one drafted after him has made a bigger impact, is what I'm saying here. So like shout out to the drafting. Shout out to him for kind of clunging into his potential, and I'm really excited to see where he goes from here. Like, that's definitely the pick of the draft for the Blue Jackets, and I think all the more impressive when you figure, like, all of the picks that they gave up, and they still managed to grab a guy like Voronkov at the 4th round, I think is really fun and impressive. We're going to quickly finish off with Tyler Angle, who was their 7th round draft pick, has 4 NHL games, played 2 of them this season, and I believe scored his first NHL goal this season. No, excuse me. He scored his first NHL goal last season, played 2 games, scored a goal, played 2 games this season, didn't score a goal. Has only 16 points in 40 games for the Monsters this season, has 3 points in 5 playoff games, I believe is a healthy scratch for the Monsters, who are starting their 3-game homestand against the Hershey Bears tonight, which is exciting. And, we are crossing all of our fingers. Tyler Angle had a really great rookie season for the Monsters back in 2020, 2021, and he was looking like a really great depth pick. A 7th round pick is basically a shot in the dark. You throw a dart at the board, pick a dude. And then since then, it's just it's gone downhill from there. This season, he really, really struggled, played the fewest games since his rookie season, only played 40 games out of the, I think, 72 game season that the AHL has. Got a little bit of NHL time, obviously, but wasn't the difference maker that they really needed him to be. Again, if you get to play NHL games as a 7th round pick, I feel like that's that's a win there, you know? And so I don't feel like, again, looking at the guys that were taken after him, the only guy that really stings taken after him is 2 picks later, the Calgary Flames took Dustin Wolf. He went 214th overall in the draft. And I mean, Dustin Wolf, I don't know if I've talked about it a lot on this particular podcast. I'm a huge Dustin Wolf fan. He's got the same kind of energy as Jet Greaves. Excellent short goalie, is only is officially 6 foot tall, but having stood next to him, I don't think he's quite hit the 6 foot mark. Has been the goalie of the year a couple of times in the AHL, was great in the playoffs most recently. He got named to the All-Star game 2 years in a row. Like, the 2020-23 season was just insane. He had a .932 save percentage and 42 wins for the Calgary Wranglers. Like, if the Blue Jackets didn't end up picking him instead of Tyler Angle, like, the goaltending depth for this team could have been very, very different. Which is, it's not like a reason where I'm like, man, why didn't we draft Dustin Wolf instead of Tyler Angle? Because it might not have worked out, but that's the interesting one here, is looking at, you know, I always like to look at who was drafted a couple of picks later. And I was looking and I was like, oh, wow. Okay, picking Dustin Wolf 2 picks later, the Calgary Flames kind of made out like a bandit with that one, because he looked like he's going to turn into a really solid goalie if he can, you know, quote unquote, overcome the size issue. If you're listening on audio, I just did some giant air quotes on the YouTube video, but yeah, that one stings a little. Let's take another quick break, and then when we get back, I want to kind of muse a little bit more on, should the Blue Jackets have kept these picks and just tried to make the playoffs without these players, or was buying at the deadline the right thing to do? So we'll talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day every single day. We're talking about the 2019 draft. And the Blue Jackets didn't do a lot in this draft because they traded all of their picks, every single one, and then picked up 3 more in other places. So that's it, which is the funny thing, is that of their, like, the 3 that they had, the picks, none of them were their original picks. They were all picks that they traded for, which is quite funny. But looking back, would I rather have, because this was the last year really that the Blue Jackets were contenders, and again, I use some kind of loose air quotes with that, because I don't think they were really contenders. This was the last year that I expected the Blue Jackets to make the playoffs. 2020, they kind of stumbled in. They weren't in a playoff spot when the COVID pause happened. They were, I think, like a standing place out. Obviously, they went into that playoff round in the bubble against the Maple Leafs. Maple Leafs did what they do. Blue Jackets made the playoffs on the back of that. They were not a playoff team necessarily. I'm not going to not enjoy that they made the playoffs, but they were probably not a playoff team, and I'm unsurprised that they eventually, you know, bowed out to the eventual champions, Tampa Bay Lightning, who they embarrassed the year before in the sweep, you know. And that's kind of the point of all of this, is, would you trade that sweep, that first win, for having started the rebuild a year earlier? You know, because that's really the last time that they were competitive was this 2019 season. They made the playoffs. They won that round, stunned everyone, swept the Lightning, lost to the Bruins in the second round, who would eventually go on to make the Stanley Cup final, and lose out to the St. Louis Blues. And then after that, obviously, they made the playoffs, lost to the first round, and then they drafted, I believe, picked 5th overall the year after that, 6th overall the year after that, 3rd overall the year after that. They're drafting 4th overall this year. So it's been 4 years since the Blue Jackets made the playoffs. If they had started picking lottery picks a year earlier, what kind of shape would the team be in right now? You know? But honestly, I don't know that the team would be in much better shape. I think the 2020 draft was kind of weak. I don't think it had. I mean, it had obviously Tim Stützle has turned into a phenomenal player. Quentin Byfield and Alex Lafreniere have, you know, turned into some very good players. There was definitely good pieces, but there wasn't, like, the Blue Jackets didn't miss out on, like, the chance for a Matthews or a McDavid or a Bedard or whatever, you know. So I feel pretty good about the fact that this was the year that they decided to go all in. They went high risk, high reward, got that playoff win. carried the momentum into the next season a little bit. And then the season after that was obviously that first no good, very bad season where they finished like 28th in the league. And that I believe was Tortorella's last season. And again, just kind of the downfall from there. I still don't think if I had a like the Blue Jackets could have been competitive this season. If we follow it back, likely they don't sign Johnny Gaudreau last off season. Or the off season before last. They probably don't end up drafting any of the players that they draft because of the changing draft positions. This could very well be could have been a competitive Blue Jackets team by now. I think Kakalainen would have been fired earlier. I think there would have been less coaching overturn. I think the player overturn would have been different, if not not worse, not better, just different. But I still don't know that I would have traded that 2019 playoff sweep for a chance to be competitive a year earlier. Maybe you guys all disagree with me, but and maybe it would be different if, again, like if Bobrovsky had stayed, or if Panarin had stayed, or if Duchesne had stayed, or any of those players had decided not to leave in free agency, and the Blue Jackets hadn't been left with nothing after all these players walked away. But it is what it is, and I think that's my final thought on this is that sweep was still some of the most fun watching hockey I have ever had in my life. And I don't think I would trade that just for a chance for the Blue Jackets to make the playoffs a season earlier. And, it's one season. I don't feel bad about taking a season extra to get back to being competitive. And I think they're going to take the steps forward this season. I friggin' hope they're going to take the steps forward this season. But I still wouldn't trade that for that playoff sweep. I think that was a real highlight in my Blue Jackets fandom. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Tomorrow, we are going to talk about Damon Severson. We're going to do his season review. We'll look at the trade. We'll look at the contract. We'll look at how he played, what his future with the team is, like all of that fun stuff. We'll take a look at that tomorrow. Thank you for listening to today's episode, for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms. We're over on YouTube. We're on SiriusXM. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.